Okay, and good evening. This is Deacon Joseph Sladen. We do the Orthodox Apologetics channel every this is so. The title of this, right, is Dear KGB FSB Funds Kindly Requested. I'm not sure where Hieromonk Enoch is. He wasn't feeling too well, so I'm hoping he comes on the broadcast fairly certainly, but I'm still here to, to talk and answer questions. It might be a short show if it's just me, so wouldn't worry too much about that, though. I'm sure there will be questions to answer and discussions to have. I chose this title because, frankly, I was noticing that there was a thread on the Orthodox Apologetics War Zone that was about a fact, which we're right now the truth of it is being debated, whether or not it's an actual legitimate facts or whether it's a forgery. Where basically before the 2007 union between the World War and the Mosca Patriot, that there was I guess you could say that there was some protest on the part of Metropolitan Journal. Now, granted, again, we don't know if the document's real or fake. I always assumed it to be real. It had been around for years, and so in any case, some people say it's fake now. It's a good segue into what's there because whoever the author of the document was, they clearly thought like a Soviet. Like they were referring to Metropolitan Anastasi and the real core as fascists, and they basically thought in that sort of time sphere. So that is something that Benedicite, Father Enoch is here. How's it going?
All right. Okay.
As I was saying, the mentality behind what we call Sergianism, or this craven.
Father Joseph, are you using an onboard microphone?
I am using an onboard microphone. What's wrong?
Is it because there's a lot of distortion in the background?
Yeah, I still don't have the cable for my online mic yet. I will try to get closer to the screen.
Okay.
But in any case, Sergianism being the kind of craven association with the Soviet state, the bowing to an antichrist government, is kind of the reason that the Catacomb Church and the Real Core outside of Russia never united with the Moscow Patriot. And when we say you didn't unite with, it tends to be downplayed. They didn't actually recognize the elections of patriarchs, Sergius or Alexis the First or Alexis the Second. So basically,
or Patriarch Pimen, or Pimen.
I always forget Pimen. That's the one who died in the arms of.
No. The one who died in the arms of the Pope. You're talking. That was Nicodem of Leningrad.
Okay. But in any case, the point is, so these
and there's this whole debate about, some Moscow Patriot people try to claim, he wasn't really a double agent; he was a triple agent. It makes it still bad, but I've heard that before in Russian.
For those who don't know about Nicodem of Leningrad, basically the question of whether he was a double agent is whether he was not only a KGB agent but also a secret union, because he actually died in the arms of Pope Paul VI.
And was given quote unquote communion by him.
Yeah. So these are
I'm sorry, Father, I was late. How long have we been discussing things?
Approximately 3 minutes.
Okay. So have we gone over exactly what the definition of Sergianism is, how it arose? Have we talked about that?
We've kind of been doing that right now.
Okay.
If you'd like to jump in, please.
No, it's all right.
So Sergianism really started with the Declaration of Sergius in 1927, where he basically declared that his joys of the church were the joys of the Soviet Union and vice versa. From then on, he was kind of seen like a useful patsy, even though he was occasionally thrown. Now that's an interesting one. Sean Ridland says, "Set of a conscious claim Nicodem drank poison that was meant for Paul VI." Well, that would make
Well, that's the theory that Nicodeme was in fact a triple agent for the Soviet Union.
Okay.
So he could. So anyway, I'm just saying. I don't. Who really knows exactly what was going on?
What is he a triple agent? I'm trying
Well, I'll say okay. Let me try to think. A regular agent is that he's an agent for the Soviets.
Right.
A double agent would have been he's secretly working for the Vatican.
Yeah.
A triple agent would be he's really working for the Soviets, but he wanted you to think he was working for the Vatican, so he could work for the Soviets.
Wouldn't that just make him a single agent?
Pardon me?
Well, that would just make him a Soviet agent.
Yeah, but yes, yeah.
Okay. Anyway.
I think it should be noted though that all the locum tenens for the patriarchal throne refused to sign any type of declaration about uniting with or obedience or proclaiming the joys. It was actually something like the joys of Marxist-Leninism is the joy of the Soviet state, which is the joy of the church. That's what they're trying to have you say. And remember, famously, St. Joseph of Petrograd, he was, in fact, I think, the locum tenens for the patriarchal throne at one point, wasn't he?
Yeah, they kind of skipped over.
And there was also a Metropolitan Kirill of Kazan, St. Kirill of Kazan. Basically, all these people kind of refused to sign it, and they were like expelled. Or there was Metropolitan Peter, St. Peter too, who was, I think, maybe he was at one point like tenens. So they finally got down the line to Sergius.
I'll do it.
Yeah. Well, I think he actually made some sort of like paltry resistance initially, but he just kind of gave in after like a few hours. All right, and he said, "Okay, fine, whatever." And then he excommunicated anybody who refused to agree to it.
Right.
Which is what made things much worse. So it wasn't like, oh well, he just did it, but we're not gonna, you had to agree with it or you got kicked out.
Yeah, and so effectively at this point, the church was largely going into prison. Because ultimately, most of the bishops and many of the clergy that weren't being killed outright were being thrown in jail. So effectively, there was no public hierarchy at the time. The hierarchy was a complete and total mess. And so from there, you don't see until the creation of the Moscow Patriarch in 1943 by Stalin an actual Moscow Patriarch. You can't say like there was a catacomb church versus a Moscow Patriarch in 1929 because there was no Moscow Patriarch and there was.
Well, technically during the 1930s, the official claim of the Soviet government was that there is like only 2 bishops left. Everybody else just simply left.
Right.
That everybody's so much embracing Marxist-Leninism, everything is just collapsing, and I think they kept 50 show churches open.
Yeah.
And Sergius, another bishop, and then they had the Living Church also.
Right, the Living Church was still allowed to operate until I think it was 1932.
Yeah. So but what happened is that they really had no use for the Living Church after they made Sergius quote unquote patriarch. I'm sending you a link, Father. Maybe you can put in the chat. It's a PDF of Russia's Catacomb Saints. This, in fact, covers all. It's like a 1,000-page book written by Rokor. And people want to look through that. They can confirm all this material because this is a subject that's been, I hate you say it, but it's been going through something like 100 times.
Sean Ridley asks, I thought Peter would be not great. I said it's difficult to compare.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, it said I thought Peter the Great created the MP. No. The Moscow Patriarch was created by Stalin.
It depends what you mean. When see the modern Moscow Patriarch, they're talking about the creation in 1942. Because if you're talking about the Patriarchate of Russia or the Patriarchate of Moscow in the classical sense, that goes back to 1589.
Yeah.
But that's not. But anybody, if the problem is that if you're trying to claim that, like Patriarch Saint Job in 1620, that his organization, that Sergius's organization is in fact the real continuator of that.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that can be claimed, other than the fact that Stalin killed off the majority of the bishops who refused to agree to obedience to the Soviet state. A few went underground, and then in 1942 he decided, for propagandistic reasons, to bring out a few of the people that lived who had been tortured to sign stuff.
Yeah, he got like 2 or it was originally like 2 or 3 bishops, and then they just made a bunch of people that the government. And
the other problem was that when they in 1942-43 they had hardly any bishops, so they had the they had to make like 32 new bishops because there was like no one left.
Right.
All right.
Well,
And 16 and 16 of the new Sergianist bishops were like former Living Church bishops who had been married. So they like had to I guess supposedly reordain them or whatever, because they basically were taking the Living Church and merging it into the Sergius organization. Although the Living Church was basically Sergianist too. I mean, it's not like it was,
really up until 2007. I'd say around 2000, the Bishops' Council of 2000. The general position of Rocco was that the Moscow Patriarchate was a separate organization of the Patriarchate of the Russian Church. So these were not similar things. One of them was a state organization. That's still the position of the three Russian churches, the Roac, the Orthodox, and so forth. They don't see the Moscow Patriarchate as their mother church. They see the Moscow Patriarchate as
it's very difficult to hear you, Father.
Okay.
I'm sorry, your voice is like really, really low.
Let me see if I can increase my microphone. But there's
much better.
Okay, there's no in other words, they didn't the free Russian churches that exist, the catacomb churches, etc. They never really respected the Moscow Patriarchate as the mother church. They had varying views on it. I'm not going to say that they didn't, but they didn't recognize it as
a legitimate authority.
Right. Now this comes to today, because we got to talk to today, and this is part of the reason why I chose the title that I did, because the question is, okay, we're talking about stuff before the Soviet Union collapsed. We're talking about, this is before communism fell. So what is Sergianism now? Is it real? Let me see if I can include that. Hold on. Okay, how's this sound, guys?
It's better.
All right. Well,
yeah, speak up too.
Okay. Well, the point is that there's a yeah. Well, that's good if you did drop that link. Let me see if it's because if you dropped it here, I've got top chat on. I should probably have live chat on. In any case, so yeah, I see it now. The point is that the question is, how is Sergianism relevant today? And I think that this is okay. Well, this is okay. Atomic Lead asks, at the risk of asking a dumb question, what is entailed by Sergianism and what makes it so wrong to a full-blown heresy? It's not a dumb question. It's just kind of 12 minutes late because we've been talking about that.
Sergianism is the evil teaching that is appropriate for the church to submit to atheist and God-hating authorities who wish its destruction, but not to and to cooperate with them. That's the offense. That's
yeah.
I mean,
effectively, it's the church cooperating with them.
I mean, not even the ecumenical patriarchate did that with the Ottomans.
Yeah.
I mean, the Sultan just wanted money and would persecute you and Aaron again. I mean, he wasn't trying to say what to teach in your seminaries and things like that. I mean, he closed them down, but he wasn't too that concerned as long as you paid him a bunch of money.
Yeah.
I mean, but nobody, no matter the amount of money, could you have paid Stalin or the Soviet state for them to stop what they were doing? I mean, they just take the money and then they wouldn't.
Yeah, they would. That's like what happened with all the gold in the churches.
Yeah, they take the money and then they do it anyway. So.
Yep. In any case, so the question becomes, how does this relate to Sergianism today? Well, there's a couple of things. The one is the practical question of apostolic succession. I'm not actually that keen on talking about that today because I know that there's different ways that people can be received from error, so on and so forth. The bigger question is, how does this system work now? If Russia supposedly calls itself an Orthodox Christian state, even though technically I believe the Constitution of Russia is still formally atheist. But what's it called? The reality is that one of the things that came up in the discussion on the war zone was the question of what we generally get occasionally. Certain people, I shall say, have referred to true Orthodox as being agents of Western governments. And if we're agents of Western governments, I'm waiting for my paycheck. I didn't get one. But that's part of the reason why, obviously, if the KGB and the FSB are paying better, then I would like some of that cash.
I mean, if you're just after money, if that's all you care about.
We're broke, and so we need cash. So dear KGB, We want to.
Now, if you recall, they're back in. If you look on the Russia's Catacomb Saints and in other sources, back in 1960 or 62, there was there was like the dictionary or encyclopedia Soviet or dictionary of religions and cults and things like that. And they actually talk about the Catacomb Church. They knew about it. It was. I mean, they didn't know where it was all the time, but they knew about it. And it was defined as an organization.
They called it the True Orthodox Church.
Exactly, they called it the True Orthodox Church. That was what I mean. In fact, that's where the term True Orthodox actually first came from, back in the late 20s. Or True Orthodox Church. I mean, you can find in earlier antecedents, but it was defined as a extreme monarchist, conservative, counter-revolutionary, reactionary organization that wished to restore the Tsar, and it was defined as an implacable enemy of state ideology of Marxist-Leninism. Everything. I mean, all the definitions would make you think these are in fact the good guys. If you aren't for Marxist-Leninism, you'd like, well, these are positive things to be against all this stuff. And then it was defined as descended from bishops who refused to unite with the Soviet state, and all the rest. I mean, so I mean, did they ever claim? I'm not sure if the Soviets ever claimed that the Catacomb Church was in fact controlled by the CIA or any of these other organizations. I don't really know if that was ever claimed by the Soviets.
But a lot of the later propaganda of the 70s and 80s involved that. And
they claimed also Solzhenitsyn was an agent of the Western powers. But a lot of these people, for example, who will attack the Orthodoxy, will say all kinds of positive things about Solzhenitsyn. All right, because
he denied the Catacomb Church existed.
Well, yes, exactly, until he was written a letter about it. So my point is that Solzhenitsyn did far more outwardly to damage the Soviet regime than, in an outward sense, in a secular sense, than True Orthodox could have done. I mean, we didn't have a mass political movement or an army or anything. You're just talking about people in their basements with some old priest, in many cases, that's doing liturgy. So,
well, one of the things that, and this is part of the reason why I want to tie this into today, is because there are a lot of movements, which, I mean, even things that kind of like question of Russian interference and stuff like that in the U.S. elections. Some of this stuff, I guess you could say the real. I guess you could say the government faction after the fall of the Soviet Union that kind of controlled things didn't know what ideology it wanted to hold. So you'll find that some of these modern political types like Alexander Dugin, you find him on both sides of the spectrum. He's a fascist, and yet he was head of the Communist Party at one point. He has ties to the Kremlin.
He was into Aleister Crowley at one point too.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, but the point is, so when you see these a lot of these new conservative nationalist movements coming out of Russia, they're not Orthodox in origin. They're Sergianist. And so you'll still hear the party line out. You'll still hear, well, the True Orthodox are, agents of the enemy state, because their concern is really largely more based upon Russian success and stability rather than Orthodox success and stability.
And they have the idea that the other idea is that after Stalin took over in the later part of Stalin's reign or control, that the Soviet Union became a crypto-Orthodox empire. I've heard this before. And that the Red Army was really, really an Orthodox army, and that atheism was just the official ideology, but everybody really believed. And there's this concept that there was supposedly this Moscow Patriot saint called Matrona of Moscow, and they say that was Stalin's spiritual director, and he met with her. And there are even these icons in Russia.
I'm pretty sure. Matrona of Moscow was a new martyr, but they created a legend that she visited Stalin on his deathbed or something.
No, it's more than that. It's that he was visiting her constantly for advice. And the idea was something like, well, he couldn't officially destroy Marxist-Leninism because there was just too much opposition. And they say that, what they say is Stalin got rid of a lot of the Jews in the Communist Party in the 30s. And therefore that shows you he was against the original Bolsheviks. Well, the problem is that we have Stalin's books, his actual, private books and things. And it's true he didn't like Jews as a rule, but that didn't mean he didn't like Marxist-Leninism. He just thought the Jews were ruining it. That's all. And also, if he was so much, wanting to reform the Soviet state supposedly in some crypto-Orthodox direction, why did he keep Lazar Kaganovich around? Lazar Kaganovich, who was Jewish, by the way, was the one who engineered and directed what was happening in like the Ukrainian famine. Okay, and that was done mostly because we know Lazar Kaganovich hated Ukrainians, he hated Slavs as a rule. Right, he despised them ethnically.
Stalin, the largest number.
And Kaganovich only died in 1985. So he was always around as a big party official. Anyway,
the problem is that a lot of these folks who are now leading, different kinds of movements in Russia, some which claim to be nationalists, some which claim to be traditionalists, are the same people as the old communists. They're the exact same people, or they're not spiritual sons, they're ideological sons. And so the point is that, unfortunately, when you hear this sort of stuff, it makes it you have to take it with a grain of salt. So
part of it is coming to grips with Soviet history, and a lot of people just simply don't want to say the Soviet Union was wrong. It was wrong to be established because they can talk about how their grandfathers were fighting in World War II. And that's the whole the May 9th or is it May 19th, the Victory Day parades. It's still suffused with obvious Soviet imagery.
Yeah.
The problem is that there's the mythology, just like there's a mythology of World War II in the United States and in Britain, things like that like a lot of people criticize. The same mythology exists, except in a ramped up form, 100 times stronger in the former Soviet Union.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
So they can talk about, it's like you'll watch programs on RT, and they might have a lot of very good programs, but when it comes to this stuff, there's it's like you're watching Steven Spielberg or History Channel program about and they'll talk about Hitler's invasion of Poland, but then it's like they ignore how the Soviets invaded at the same time, and they ignore the fact that, and then when they address how the Soviets invaded the Baltic states around the same time, that never gets talked about, or they say it was in reaction to, keeping, the Nazis out. Although the original agreement that Hitler had was that Stalin could have all the stuff. He didn't care. Right? And then, of course, they omit the fact the massive amount of war crimes that the Soviet army committed on the Eastern Front, just as much as the Germans. No one ever talked about that stuff. So, so in other words, they create this mythology of, the glorious Soviet Union saving the world, from the Nazis, and in reality, it was just simply a battle between these two ideologies, and the Soviet Union ultimately killed more people. But I don't think they can acknowledge that because there's something like 15 to 20 million people in the Soviet Union died in World War II. So there's a lot of emotional attachment people have to the Soviet imagery, to the Soviet past.
Well, in that sense, Russia is not that different from us because they have had their
yeah, that's true. But exactly. But the other truth is that I think the United States only had 200,000 deaths in World War II compared to 20 million.
Yeah.
So my point is that if it's just so much that you're fighting against this. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's 100 times stronger than it is in the United States.
Oh, absolutely, but I don't want to be too myopic about it. And what I mean by that is, for example, I think that to some degree, even people in the Soviet Union recognized just how messed up the Soviet military structure was. I do remember one movie I watched when I was there, which was was a war movie, which was very popular over there. Basically, at one point, a mad general is just basically sending his troops out knowing they're going to get killed anyway for no reason.
He does what?
He sends out his own troops to get killed knowing that they're just going to die. There's no logic to it. And so, the point is that's kind of I don't want it's not kamikaze, especially in the military sense.
Well, remember, the Soviets during the first stages of the war, nobody wanted to fight for Stalin. In fact, that's why 4 to 5 million Soviets surrendered within the first year. So like there's like what's his name, General Vlasov, and all these other Soviet generals. After, and then the NKVD, to prevent that from happening, prevent retreats and surrenders. When the Soviet army was advancing, the NKVD troops would be behind them with machine guns to say, if you surrender or if you retreat, we're going to shoot or shell you.
Yeah.
So, that anyway. So
Now,
that's not talked about a lot. So.
Atomic Lead, Sean said, do you have any particular thoughts on Duggan? He seems to be a negative influence in the world, but I only know the surface dealt well with stuff like his affinity for Crowley. Sean Ridley said, I've been exposed to Duggan since the 90s. I recall he was suggesting an alliance between the Browns, Russian Trapped Greens, Russian Muslims. It was weird. Well, I don't think you have to go much farther than to look at his biography on a wiki. I mean, supposedly he was a dissident and anti-communist in the 1980s, and then when they refounded the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, he helped write their constitution. So, the point is...
Was he a communist dissident? Because they had those. I mean, you had people in the 70s and 80s who were still Communist Party members who did not agree with the party leadership, and they were just declared dissidents.
I don't think he was really ideologically either. And what I mean by that is he was ideologically more nationalist in terms of Russia's geopolitical interests than anything else. So he doesn't care if it's communism or capitalism or fascism. Whatever works, as long as he wins. And
National Bolshevism, I think they call it, don't they?
National Bolshevism. He was one of the founders of the National Bolshevik Party, the National Bolshevik Front. He was a hardcore fascist. But again, this is the same type of book. This person will still say that he's on the side of Stalin. And the point is, in that sense, he's what you would call like kind of like a social nationalist. And no, it's fine. It's fine, Sean. You point out he was anti-Yeltsin. Yeltsin was a Western reformer, and he was not. He
was a drunk. He was a drunk most of the time too.
Well, he was. Yeah. There's legends surrounding his drunkenness too. But the point is,
the problem with Yeltsin is that he just let people do whatever they wanted.
Well, that was the issue about selling off the Soviet industries. How people got ripped off when that was done under Yeltsin. The oligarchs planned that out anyway. They knew what they were going to do.
Yeah. Well, my point is that Yeltsin made the country in such a terrible situation that no one could reasonably support him eventually. And it's generally acknowledged that in 1997, I think in 97 when they have the elections, like the second round of elections, so-called for Yeltsin, that he did not in fact win. And now, in fact, interestingly, the Clinton administration, the U.S. government, sent a lot of officials over there to help, quote unquote, Yeltsin. All right.
So he was in control.
Well, they were controlled, and it's generally acknowledged that the Communist Party actually won the national vote, and won the presidential vote, but they just threw away millions of ballots because they wanted Yeltsin to remain in power, because he would just let them do whatever they wanted in destroying the country and taking resources from the country. Which is kind of, Putin is kind of like the reaction to that,
yeah, exactly. And effectively, really, the real strength of Putin is that, the Siloviks, the power brokers that developed in Yeltsin's time their kind of influence became limited to some degree. But the point is that when you're dealing with these nationalist parties, I would say that even though, like, Putin was kind of for a while sponsoring Rodina. He liked Rodina, which was a kind of a quasi-nationalist party, but it was also like an official nationalist party. So the thing is, a lot of these movements were not official. They had some connection to the Kremlin, but they weren't dominant forces. And so I think that a lot of the stuff you hear when it comes out of these kind of Russian national propaganda type channels, it's just like recycled stuff. You change the ideology slightly, but the interests are the same and the reactions are the same. There's no difference between what a Sergianist or Soviet would have said in 1980 about the Church abroad or Greek calendars, and what or what a so-called Russian nationalist now would say about old calendars today, because their thinking is precisely the same. It's about power, and because Orthodox Christians are not supposed to be beholden to it, then we're still a problem. were, you know, in that sense, were always.
You also remember that throughout the 1990s, I mean, it just became more. It was already going on before that. The standard Moscow patriarchate trope was that Rokor was the Nazi church. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
That it was essentially something created and controlled by the Nazis, and you know, it was a Vlasovite named after General Vlasov, who was like one of the anti-Stalin commanders that the Germans hired, kind of for the Russian Free Army, which they never really gave a lot of support to ultimately. But and you know, that was that kind of the standard line for a very long time, and then I guess they suddenly were told to drop it after the Union. Though a lot of them don't. I mean, you in fact still have a lot of Moscow Patriot sites, like what the Holy Fire site. It's called Holy Fire or something like that. And I'm not sure what the name of the Russian. I can't remember what the Russian name for it is. In which they will continue to promote this. That, you know, the Rokor was not a church until it united with us and such. Or they're trying to say that St. John Maximovich always commemorated the Patriarch of Moscow, the so-called Patriarch of Moscow, and he was always supporting it. When all they can bring up is the fact that when when thing like the 4 or 5 Rokor bishops in China decided to unite with the Moscow Patriarchate MP in like 1947, they did that under the auspices that we were told that the church in Russia was actually free now. And almost all of them, or at least St. John and a few others, repudiated within something like 2 months after they discovered the truth of the matter. You know, because they've been trying to get St. John Maximovich to fly into the Soviet Union to meet with people. I think at that point, I guess he became very skeptical of things. And then, of course, the communists tried to burn to death the future Metropolitan Saint Philaret of Moscow when he was in Shanghai. You know, Chinese communists under the auspices of the Soviet forces. Okay.
So anyway, getting back to Duggan, I found a pretty interesting thing. If you read about, again, I'm looking at the Handy Wiki article here. I'll just put this up because it's so illustrative. You know, basically was baptized in the MP by his great grandmother, and he joined the Old Believers. But the reason he joined the Old Believers, according to Marlene Llewell, is because of his adherence to the Old Believers allows him to stand between paganism and Orthodox Christianity without formally adopting either of them. His choice isn't paradoxical, since according to him, in the wake of Rene went on, Russian Orthodoxy, and especially the Old Believers, have preserved an esoteric and initiatory character which was lost in Western Christianity. As such, the Russian Orthodox tradition may be merged with neo-paganism and may, quote, host neo-paganism's nationalist force, which anchors it in the Russian soul and separates it from the two other Christian confessions. So my point on this is that all of these movements are essentially, and Duggan just represents them, although he kind of works behind the scenes with a lot of them, represents a kind of anti-Christianity, or the anti-Christian nationalism couched in Christian usages and terminologies, but not actually in its soul Christian, which reflects, to be quite honest, yeah, he's basically LARPing as Orthodox, but to be quite honest, so is Vladimir Putin. This is something that's been long known. Before the Union and before, like, people were like talking about what a great Orthodox Christian he was, people knew he didn't believe in anything. He'd bow at pagan ceremonies. It was ridiculous. And now, you know, it's like people are like, I saw an article saying Putin was a secret Christian monk a day after his second mistress has a child or something, or his third ex-wife or something. Father?
Yeah. I should also know, just for the sake of noting it about the Old Believers, that the Old Believers, for all their big talk, were publicly a public organization during the Soviet period, which means that they were just as compromised as the Moscow Patriarchate.
Yeah.
So when people bring about what about the Old Believers,
the Old Believers are free people. No, they were not.
I mean, why would the Old Believers be persecuted and had to be, in many cases, somewhat underground during the Tsarist period? Not really underground, but why would they be like public and have all their churches in public and all this other stuff during the Soviets in the 50s and 60s? It's because they were controlled too. So anyway,
and I'd say it's easier to control a religion.
Well, in the case of the Old Believers, they just cared about doing the old right. That's all they ultimately cared about. So you could do anything else. They didn't care where they got bishops from. That's why, like, even Old Believers it was like even why 1920 you had like 100,000 or 200,000 Old Believers become unions.
Yeah, the under
yeah, because the Pope was like, well, you can do the old rite. And they're like, okay, we don't care. We're just as long as we do the old rite. I mean, that shows you when people start talking good about the old believers as if they're like.
But that's probably what inspired the Soviets when you think about it, because they were like, well, shoot, if they'll become papists, while they're being old believers, why can't they be Soviets? They were probably like.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
So anyway.
Well, the other point is that if you criticize any of the Moscow Patriarchate or the problems in Russia, what happens is people say, well, obviously, it's like a dialectic they create up. They say, well, obviously, that means you support, all the anti-Russia stuff. You want to invade Russia, or you want to support the Ukrainian crazy government. You want to do all this stuff, but that doesn't. Why does that have to follow? Can't you criticize the Sovietism left and Sergianism and the MP without saying you want to attack Russia with nuclear weapons? Do you know what I mean, Father Joseph?
No, and I think that the problem is
because that every time I've done this, like, oh, you see, you're working for the the Western intelligence, and you want to do blah blah blah, and you want to invade Russia, you want to have all these sanctions.
But here's the thing: that doesn't work for me because I lived in Russia. I saw actual Russian people who didn't put up with this trash. And the point is, they would be persecuted by the state. Random cops or government agents would cause some problems in their churches. But they were loyal Russian people. What they weren't is they weren't loyal to a program. And so the thing is, in that sense, I guess you could say that they were, really the most awake sort of people there. But certainly you couldn't accuse them of being agents of.
Well, I mean, it comes down to asking these people how are you allowed to criticize the Moscow Patriarchate? How are you allowed to criticize United Russia, the party? And their ultimate answer is no, you're not allowed to say anything bad against them. Even though if you go on Moscow Patriarchate sites, there's like dozens of them that are not technically, I mean, you will find Moscow Patriarchate people saying all kinds of bad things about the Moscow Patriarchate.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they'll say things like, the Blue Mafia stuff, which is a well-discussed issue in Russia, at least in the Moscow Patriarchate circles. The Blue Mafia issue is that Blue Mafia is another name for the homosexual gang organization. All right, it's like the homosexual counterpart. Like the Vatican has this kind of gay clique at the top, that kind of like the St. Gallen group. The same thing was created during the Soviet period in the Moscow Patriarchate, simply because the KGB knew if they started putting morally compromised people in the power, that then they would you'd have to it's just the same thing in politics. Like Dennis Hastert years ago, he was a child molester. But then he molested a bunch of children back in the early 90s at his job at coaching at a high school. And then suddenly the next year, he becomes a representative of the local state Illinois legislature. Then the next year, he becomes a U.S. congressman and Speaker of the House. The most meteoric rise in history. Now, why? Well, it's because they knew all this stuff in his closet. They knew it, and they put him, and they blackmailed him, and they put him in the power. All right? Because then if they say anything, you can say, look, we'll destroy you, and you'll go to prison. All right? So it's the same thing with the whole Blue Mafia stuff in the Moscow Patriarchate.
I had read somewhere that Alexei tried to do something about that, but he was largely unsuccessful.
Well, he could have, but he couldn't do anything about Filaret even.
Yeah.
Even if he had wanted to. I mean, people kind of complained to him, and he just said it's not my business. Because technically Filaret of Kiev ran de facto he was like the old de facto head of it, and he just pissed off too many people eventually. Yeah. So that was always his problem, that he would do things like that. He would overreach and such, But anyway, I mean, even when I had my debates in the Philippines with two Moscow Patriot priests, and I started bringing up the stuff, their answer was, Father, their answer was that we know all this, we know about all the problems, and they were still
because that's a coping.
Because my point is that it's not like they didn't know what was happening, and they were just hoping nobody else knew. But then when you present it to them, they have no choice but to acknowledge it.
They're just like, oh well. Their attitude. I would guess that inside they were probably thinking, well, so what? You're not Russian, so you can't bring this up.
Exactly. They that's what they said. This is our church. This is our problem, our issues.
Yeah, exactly.
This is us who say exactly. I mean, you can go on Russian news sites and you can find Moscow Patriot priest arrested for sleeping with 12-year-old girl. Moscow Patriot priest leaves and converts to Islam. I'm not kidding. That was that's happened. one thing after the other. Part of it because they hardly have any clergy in some areas, and so they just basically ordain anybody.
Moscow Patriot priest, most recent one I read was had to have an Instagram account removed because he kept on showing off expensive clothes.
Or Moscow Patriot priest found with 100 guns, or something like that. You know.
Another thing I wanted to bring up there's kind of like
not that owning guns is bad, but anyway.
No, not that owning guns is bad, but the idea that clergy,
why was he owning the guns? The concept is, he was supporting some ultra nationalist organization that was going to overthrow the government. I have no idea. It could have been they just. Oftentimes they would accuse people of stockpiling weapons, and they weren't really stockpiling weapons.
Yeah, but I'm more talking about the pictures you see of like the MP priests holding like rocket launchers and stuff like that. I mean, that's just inexcusable.
Well, I guess they're trying to. I mean, I don't think in the 19th century you had pictures of Russian Orthodox priests, holding up muskets. Maybe, but I don't think so.
Atomic Lead asks, I once read the remark that ecumenism is an excuse for all the sodomites to congregate, and that's starting to sound true. Probably. I mean, I think that I hate to say it, but ecumenism is such an effeminate heresy by its very nature. And that's not to insult any women or anything like that, but it's just so faggy, it's like, this is truth. But does it really have to be truth? I mean, it's just really, it's just totally.
Yeah, in fact, look at all the biggest ecumenists in world orthodoxy. I mean, for example, the most prominent ecumenist, of course, is the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew. Not to get off topic, but where is all this gay stuff in world orthodoxy America originating from? A lot of it, like all these from these Greek archdioceses or even somewhat OCA groups.
Or Callistos, where?
Callistos, but he's ecumenical patriarchate.
Yeah, I
know. So anyway, but back to the issue we're talking about. Let's go back to that, Father.
Getting back to our original point. So basically, these movements, to some degree, are they're controlled opposition, is what they are.
Now, remember, in the late 50s, Khrushchev, during the mid 50s, when he took power, he had this supposed Stalinization program. Okay,
he did,
but he let it go even further, not more than he wanted to, but he allowed it to happen, and he allowed it to happen because he wanted to see who exactly was going to be criticizing not just Stalin, but other aspects of things.
Yeah,
and he in fact let a lot of people. Most of the people were let out of Gulag during that period. A lot of them were. Including bishops who have been in the Gulag since 1932 or whatever, okay? And one of these was an Archbishop Hieromonk, and there was in fact a little booklet that Bishop Gregory Grabe had written about this back in the 70s. It's very interesting. In which he says, Hieromonk and these other people were invited to sit on the Moscow Patriarchate Synod, okay? They had been in prison for 25 years. And so they agreed, and they were told, oh, well, now we have freedom. We can say whatever we want. And so Hieromonk began to criticize everything he was seeing uncanonical and wrong and even heretical he was seeing that was happening. All right? And they had it got to a boiling point, but after about 6 weeks, he was just suddenly sent back to prison for the rest of his life. All right? And what happened is during that, Khrushchev thaw period, they then, at the end of it, after they found out all these priests who were suddenly beginning to criticize everything that was happening, they were all suddenly sent back. They were all suddenly sent to prison, because what he was trying to do was figure out who was just the anti-Stalinists and who were really the anti-Bolsheviks.
Right.
And once you find out because he would work with the anti-communist, the anti-Stalinist communists, because he was one of those, but he really wanted to figure out who else was the real enemy. So. They've done things like that, but
we're still the real enemy.
Pardon me?
I said, and we're still the real enemy.
Yes, I guess. It's not like the United States has a lot of. I'm not defending everything happening in America, though. So.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. But the point is, the general gist of it is as this country becomes more and more atheistic in its outlook, it will become more and more hostile to Orthodox Christians. It already is to some degree. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But
what other subjects are there to address?
Well, I still haven't actually formally asked the KGB for money.
Oh no, you did. Remember, you already did that. You said that we're broke, so please send us money.
Right.
The problem is that I don't think. I think, however, what would happen though is there's various degrees, and I think this is maybe the argument. There are various degrees of being an agent and being controlled. All right, this is what they accuse us of. All right, the Moscow Patriarchate. That the lowest level is that, oh, we're the agent without knowing we're the agent. We're just so duped by anti-Soviet propaganda that
The term for that would be useful idiot.
Yeah, so that we're so much useful idiots and we're so duped by anti-Soviet propaganda that we will just say things that would be beneficial to the Western establishment without us necessarily even knowing that we're benefiting them or being paid by them. All right. The problem with this is that it assumes you cannot criticize the Soviet Union or you cannot criticize, the Moscow Patriarchate. I don't know. They'd have to also argue.
One name came up in that discussion about the true Orthodox being Western agents, and that would be our friend Boomer, and he because he brought that up, and I think you addressed him on that on Facebook. But basically, where would you even get that? You'd have to me, from my perspective, that's a propaganda talking point. You had to read somewhere, because I refuse to believe that some Soviet general talked to our buddy Boomer there and was like, well, what's it called? They're state agents. That had to come from something ridiculously stupid that he read, because he didn't ask any of us. He certainly didn't come to any true Orthodox churches or meetings. But to assume that we're state agents, it's like it's a form of indoctrination. So I have to wonder about that.
I mean, for example, it gets to the point where they have to say that St. Joseph of Petrograd, who was like tortured and then shot to death, was collaborating with the British Empire. He so loved the British Empire, apparently, that he remained faithful to Orthodoxy. I mean, it's ridiculous.
We know of all his great English writing.
Pardon me?
I said we know of all his great English writing.
I don't think he spoke English ever. So
that was sarcasm.
And this is, in fact, why the Moscow Patriarchate will not recognize St. Joseph as a saint, even though he was one of the great martyrs of the persecution. So,
what I thought was interesting was that icon that they've made of him standing on top of Sergius.
Yes.
Yeah, that actually that was an early viral phenomenon. When I was living in Russia, it had just been painted, and I actually saw it for real in one of the ROAC churches there. But it was like gaining traction with people, and we were sending it to each other on their cell phones and everything like that. So it was pretty funny. That he was still so massively popular even then among Russian people. So it's. I think that they're going to have to address St. Joseph.
I mean, what about the giant? What about the Metropolitan of Belgorod a few years ago? The MP Metropolitan who had like the giant icon of Stalin behind him.
Oh.
I mean, it's like that stuff. You can ignore that. That's all right somehow. That doesn't make you bad. But if you have an icon of St. Joseph of Petrograd, that's the worst thing. That's like having, I guess.
Well, the kind of complaint that the people shot back was like, well, he shouldn't be standing on top of somebody. He wasn't violent.
Well, I'll tell you this. There are all kinds of icons and mosaics and paintings in Greek monasteries of St. Mark of Ephesus standing on top of Eugene Pope.
There was a...
is no one familiar with the famous St. Mark of Ephesus iconography where he's like trampling down?
They say it's based on that type, but now people have pointed out that in the one most famous picture that Eugene is actually on the floor next to his foot, not actually up.
Mm-hmm. All right, potatoes, apples and orange, potato, huh?
And then Sean asks, how deep is Russian security and Orthodox news, etc.? I don't know. I do. I mean, it's funny because my experiences with, traditionalist Orthodox news, and we run an FTU. We do know that one, traditionalist news source, supposedly, probably the bigger dissident source, is actually funded by Gleb Pavlovsky. And he was, he's still influential in the Kremlin. So,
which source is this? Is this Porto Credo?
Credo, yeah.
Well, I don't know if to be honest, describing Porto Credo as
it's really, they've always kind of pushed this concept of alternative orthodoxy.
Who is the guy who's like the chief journalist of Porto Credo?
Alexander Soldano.
Yeah, and I never can figure the guy out. I mean, to me,
I met him. He did a great impression of Metropolitan Valentine.
Yeah, well, this is the question though: is he kind of just like a? Does he? Because I know Gregory Laurier is massively involved with that organization.
Oh yeah, no, he is. He's on the editorial board.
Yeah. But Soldatov doesn't seem to be part of his church. He seems to be like generically Orthodox, whatever that's supposed to mean.
Yeah, I tend to think Soldatov is more just like in another universe he'd be a news of the weird guy, because he seems to find these bizarre sects and so on and so forth and be like, hey, check this out. They'll have like a woman in some Episcopal robes or stuff like that. So I mean, it's more of a shock thing.
I mean, but the other thing with the problem with Portal Credo is that they're good for finding all the bad news about the Moscow Patriarchate. I mean, if you actually want to find bad news about the Moscow Patriarchate, like bad stuff, like scandals, you will find it, because they search the Russian. They don't have to search the Russian newspapers; they can just find them. Yeah. But the other problem is that what I think is true is Portal Credo will in fact criticize. I mean, for example, there was this case in Belarus in which they some Belarusian Moscow Patriot group built like these hospitals and maternity homes so women wouldn't have abortions. All right, and Portal Credo had some sort of article saying that this extremist anti-abortion rhetoric is not going to be helpful. All right,
so lefty.
Well, the problem is that it's a combination of all kinds of people. All right. To me, it seems like Portal Credo can legitimately be described as they simply do not like anything about the current ruling authorities in Russia, and it's not just because they're anti-communist. It's because I think they do promote this kind of weird. I don't know. I don't know what to say about them. That's. I'm just saying they seem to just be opposite. They seem to just be in opposition just for being opposition. That's almost what it seems like.
I believe the term is controlled opposition, which is what I said earlier. Because again, if it falls under someone in the Kremlin's payroll, it's controlled.
I mean, the reason I say this is that I don't. I mean, for example, if I was just opposition to be opposition, I would be writing articles like that on NFT all the time.
Yeah.
But if I see a Moscow Patriot bishop, even if I don't like everything about the organization, fund an organization to keep women from having abortions, I'm like, well, that's a positive thing. I'm not going to attack him for that. How can I attack him for doing that if it's actually a positive?
Russia's resurrecting, but the point is,
I'm not going to say this is the new holy patriarch or the new czar is coming or what. I mean, that's not yet going to happen. So.
All right, so we got another question. Atomic leads it. I read a tradcast criticize the idea of Sergianism as a heresy being neo-Donatism. And how would you respond, and does this have to do with differing sacramental theology?
Donatism, again, the Roman Catholics seem to accuse anybody of
I don't know what Donatism means.
It's like they keep saying that word, but I don't think they know what it means. Donatism is the view that if you commit deadly sins, and if you're a priest, you are ipso facto deposed. That is the essential Donatistic view. That's broken down. That's why the Donatists would for example, have to come up with all these fancy explanations about, there was Tychonian Donatism, there was Maximian Donatism, but the Donatist view is that even if a priest secretly committed a deadly sin, like he secretly lusted after a woman in his heart, he went through some imaginary motions or whatever, that he would be automatically deposed by God and his priesthood would be invalid. Okay? I don't see how that's the same as Sergianism. Sergianism, again, is a teaching. It's saying that you can have union. Exactly. Sergianism is saying that you can that the joys of communism are the joys of orthodoxy. I mean, how is that the same as Donatism? I mean, communism is blasphemy. Communism and Marxist-Leninism are blasphemy. All right, they're like worse than a heresy. They're like a heresy of their secular. You call it a heresy in a certain sense. I mean, it's like so broken down. I mean, if somebody said the joys of orthodoxy are the same as the joys of child molestation, I'd say that's a heresy. I mean, it's a heresy of.
We'd have to check the laws of Apollo.
Yeah, you can. You can make up all kinds of new heresies and things. I mean, you can, and they're legitimate. I mean, but they're always some sort of revolving around the door of immoralism, which is a heresy, modernism. that is degrading the freedom and the power of the church, and simply stating that blasphemy cannot be equivalent to the church. So, I mean, all these traditionalist Roman Catholics who seem to talk about the infiltration in the Sedevacantists seem to talk about the infiltration of the Vatican by the communists in the 40s and the 50s and 60s. And, you know, this created this and this did all this. I mean, I don't know where they're coming with this from.
It's a circular firing squad. Trendcats used to say this about Orthodox in general, particularly Roquefort, because their sacraments wouldn't be recognized. And I think that that's a pretty big thing for them.
Why should they care if people they don't think are part of the church recognize their sacraments or not?
Well, the reason why there's actually a reason for this, Father, and it comes from their own theology. And what I mean by that is that from their perspective, because they are very big on valid form and intention, their perspective is that they can say that even the Greek schismatics, that would be us, have valid sacraments, even though we are still formal schismatics from their church. So when you attack them and say that they don't have valid sacraments, you're not simply saying that they're not part of the church. You're saying their theology is fundamentally corrupted.
So are they irked by it, I guess? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, well, no, I think that they're absolutely...
I mean, I'm just saying, I don't care if another group says I don't have valid sacraments. Why do I care? I'm not part of them. So, anyway.
Atomic Lead said the better analogy for a Catholic to make would be it seemed to be if the Archbishop of Paris swore his loyalty to Robespierre and friends.
Yeah. In fact, there was something called the French, or was it the Constitutional Church, which was created during the Revolution. In fact, they were all excommunicated and expelled by the Pope at the time because they swore allegiance to the French Republic.
Well, that was very handy, Atomic Lead. Now we can make that. If someone accuses us of Donatism, we can just point to Robespierre and the Constitutional Church and see how that ends. So the point is, I think that's. I think that covers that. If there are any other questions, if there was anything you wanted to touch upon from the war zone, Father, anything like that.
I mean, we were discussing the whole issue of papacy, but I don't know what else to say about this subject. I think we've actually had this conversation, probably a few unmarked posts. I mean, not posts, but videos. I'm sorry, my health is in not very good shape. I'm trying. My mind is trying to clear up my mind. I don't know what else to say, Father. I'll let you continue.
Let me see here. Well, I mean, from my perspective, there is not much. There's we've covered Sergianism, we've covered modern Sergianism, why people feel the need to. A lot. We've covered controlled opposition. I mean, there's not much to say here. I mean, trying to think. There's, it's pretty straightforward. I was gonna, make some jokes, but I decided not to.
Well, let's go over some of the recent posts on the war zone, and then maybe we can connect them, or we can wrap things up and get back to the topic. But there's a lot of stuff that's recently been posted. One of them is a post about from the website orthodoxynet.com blog.
Orthodoxnet.com.
Yeah, it's basically orthodoxnet.com, and it's about this OCA archdeacon or proto-deacon.
Okay.
Exactly. I'm sorry. No, it's written by. Let's see. Okay, so this OCA proto-deacon Theodore Feldman.
Yeah.
Basically talking about how the Orthodox Church is wrong and to be against homosexuality and LGBTQ. All right, I don't know if you want to post that in the links so people can understand that. The article says the following. Proto-deacon Theodore Feldman published a profane article that bears false witness against scriptures and contradicts the Orthodox Church teaching with regard to multiple moral issues. He promotes the corrupt LGBTQ ideology regarding human identity and sexual activity. He insinuates that homosexuality is not a sin and is not condemned by the scriptures. He insists that Jesus Christ neither forbade nor saw fit even to mention homosexuality, not only condemned adultery. He claims the holy tradition, is silent regarding LGBTQ issues. He rejects the opinions of church fathers regarding contemporary moral issues. And let's go to this OCA Archdeacon and Proto-Deacon's article. Oh, well, guess what? It's on Orthodoxy in Dialogue. How could I not know?
Oh, the Democrats and Friends?
Pardon me?
Democopolis and friends.
Exactly. It's their blog.
Sort of.
First off, the claim that our Lord didn't mention LGBTQ stuff. Well, he kind of mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed, but our Lord didn't explicitly mention child molestation. He didn't explicitly mention, I don't know, beheading people. I mean, no one in the Israelite Jewish culture of the time would have accepted sodomy or LGBT. Why did he have to mention it at all? He didn't explicitly mention prayer for the dead. This is almost like a Protestant argument, and it's because almost everybody accepted that it was correct. Prayer for the dead was correct, and he didn't have to mention LGBTQ transgender crap because nobody would have accepted it back in like 30 AD.
Well, it's kind of funny because he was like, trying to say that basically Leviticus was outdated by Christ.
Well, our Lord still talks about Moses, the law of Moses. And he says he did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. And the church has always interpreted that all the positive moral commandments, all the moral commandments and prohibitions are still valid. That what's not valid is animal sacrifice and clean and unclean, all this other stuff, all right? But the moral law is not fundamentally dependent upon, the ritual law of Moses. So it says the article goes on and says Proto-Deacon Feldman serves in the OCA and is currently assigned to Holy Trinity Cathedral in Boston. Oh, Father Robert Arita. That's exactly what they say. This all makes sense. Robert Arita is the chief OCA architect of their homosexual agenda. The same Father Arita also penned a chapter titled "Response to Myself: Pastor's Thought of Same-Sex Marriage." In the book "For I Am Wonderfully Made: Text on Eastern Orthodoxy and LGBT Inclusion."
I'm blown away. I'm reading this article. I'm blown away that it's, in the first place, he tries to answer Leviticus. He doesn't bring up 1 Corinthians, which of course mentions adultery, drunkenness, fornicators, practicing homosexuals. He also skips over, and then he, of course, I've heard the argument, oh, well, they only mean pederasts. Not even going to go there. But my favorite part of this is it says, from Holy Tradition. Both sides of the debate appeal to tradition, but from Holy Tradition we hear itself only silence. I'm pretty sure that the canons of St. John the Faster are not silence.
Yeah, I mean, what about the combined works of the Holy Fathers when they speak about moral issues like fornication, adultery, and homosexuality?
Yeah, the idea that the only way you can say the Holy Tradition was silent on the matter is if you don't know anything.
Sorry, my dog's barking.
No, that's okay. Well, the dog.
And then he also says the opinions of the Church Fathers on sexual behavior are just that, opinions growing out of their own cultural context. Now, always aside from adultery. Now, here's the question: why does he consider their opinions against homosexuality to be cultural, but not their opinions on adultery? What makes him say that? Why is it he's making artificial? Why do you think he's making that distinction, Father?
Because that's what's in there.
I beg your pardon?
Because that's what's in there. There's no other reason for that. It's just part of the whole perverse dice of the time. It has nothing to do with whether or not it's right or wrong. If adultery gets promoted tomorrow, he'll be promoting that too.
Exactly. I mean, and people are already trying to promote this like open marriage crap. I mean, I saw some article on one of the. Sorry.
Yeah,
okay, so this is my dogs don't like this at all. They don't like me. Hold on, sorry.
I've had enough with the sodomy.
They don't like hearing about this evil stuff. Okay, my Shiba Inus said they cannot stomach any more of these articles by these gay people.
They cannot. More Robert Arita.
They can't. But talking about so
Sean Ridlin points out Feldman. Yeah, he's a Jewish convert, but a lot of Jewish converts are not this.
Yeah, but it may be, and it could be he came from like who knows? I mean, a lot of most Jews in America support this stuff. They're like really liberal about this crap.
Now, asked why the article, I assume it's not the NFTU, claiming the GOCK was claiming their Sergianism, about the GOCK claiming their Sergianism. Well, first off, that wasn't actually written by either of us, if I remember correctly. That
was people were sending that to me, asking me to post it, and I made a point of saying this is by Bishop Filaret of the Artox saying this.
Right. We do that a lot on NFTU. We will post other people's opinions when they request it of us.
For example, if Bishop Photius a marathon, he probably wouldn't, but if you send me an article rebutting it, I post that.
Yeah. We do that all the time.
Now, Bishop Filarete's argument is that the GOCK has. I don't think he ever outright says they are Sergianist heretics. I think he says they're like folding into it. I can't quite remember. But the argument is essentially that the GOCK has decided, this is not our GOC, but has decided to register as part of the Ministry of Cults and Non-Orthodox Religions or something like that. This is because they can register as an entity, whereas before, according to the Greek Constitution, they could register as independent communities, but not as a denomination, you might say, or a jurisdiction.
Right.
Okay. Now supposedly the head of the Greek Supreme Court, who had in fact ruled in favor of the true Orthodox back in the 20s, the famous Mar Hills case where we
that was the 80s.
The 80s. Basically it said that we could receive health care like everybody else, whereas they were trying to prevent us from doing that before. He said that you don't need to do this. You simply have to, and the reason he said is because technically the Greek Constitution says that the official religion of Greece is that of the Greek Orthodox Church as was established at the Revolution. All right, and the true Orthodox of any different jurisdiction have always claimed that they are in fact the heirs of the 1825 or 1826 Greek Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
All right. So now I don't exactly know, to be honest, the full rebuttal that Bishop Photius and Marathon or others would write to it, so I can only speculate about how they would reply. All I have to say is I don't think I would if the state came here and said we want you to register as part of the Department of sectarian organizations or cults or whatever, I would be against doing it. I would say and I know my bishop would too. All right, I'd rather us not be registered under anything than register under that.
Well, I know that was like, I know that under Bush, based connected the state. So they don't like Bush either.
Hold on, Father Joseph. There's like a squirrel outside my door. Hold on, outside my window.
Could be the squirrel. Also be the mention of Bush. Robert Arena. Anyway. Since you mentioned it not being your GOC, is there a major theological divide between GOCK and GOCA, or is it closer to a bishop's egos issue? I do know occasionally bishops listen to the show, so I'm not going to say that it would ever possibly be an egos issue. I couldn't possibly imagine that. But as for a theological divide, no, there's not really any theological divide between most of these parties. Usually it's a long, drawn-out fight that people are keeping over. I mean, people still, people keep their historical beefs. It's worth noting, the head of the GOCK was part of the trial that supposedly deposed Archbishop Xentios. So that's, kind of kept the beef alive between the Arians in it and the GOCK.
This seems to be like a free-for-all episode tonight, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of is. And they are kind of like, this is a fun fact. I don't know if you know this, but on Caniggo Street, this is an important thing I should mention. Two differing jurisdictions of the True Orthodox, no, don't feel bad. Two different jurisdictions of the True Orthodox, the Greek calendars, actually operate their headquarters out of the same building. So they kind of like snort at each other as they pass each other on the stairs. But effectively, because they're both claiming the building. So the point is, like, they have one, like, the Macarius has like one floor, and then the Clinical Synod has another floor. And, it's, I don't want to say that, they have their reasons. And I'm not going to intrude on their reasons because I'm not there. I'm not, I think that more could be done, of course, but again, it's the problem. The problem always occurs whenever there is a theological divide that begins. They'll have to deal with the fact that there are going to be power struggles. That happened in the 4th century. It happens in every century. Stuff like this happens, and they eventually you outlive them. and that's the only thing you can do. You know, when I came into true Orthodoxy, with the exception of the Rokor, the Synod Resistance, and the Romanians, and under Vlasy and the Bulgarians. The point is that the Cypriot communion and the Rokor were the only true Orthodox communion. And you know, now most true Orthodox are in communion with some other body, with very few exceptions. So it's a very different world than the one that I was baptized into. So you know, time makes a big difference.
All right.
And so, in any case, no, it was a good question, and I think it's perfectly fair to ask. I think we're going to see, you know, I mean, technically, who knows what's going to happen in the world Orthodoxy? Maybe some of them will. I think that might have actually been part of the motivation behind Bishop Philaretus' article. And what I mean by that is that when the MP first started to attack the EP and was breaking communion with them, it was the GOCK that put out a letter almost immediately afterwards saying we'd be willing to discuss and negotiate with you if you're against ecumenism. So the point is that
that was in reaction to the Ukrainian Mosca Patriot Bishop. I can't remember his name, Anthony something or
yeah, but it is
saying that well, if the Greeks do this, we're going to start talking to the old calendarists.
Right, but what is interesting is the fact that after they made that statement, it would be a Greek bishop of the Artok who would be, you know, trying to point out that they sound like Sergianists now. I mean, I don't want to say that that's too. I don't want to go too far fetched, but I can't help but think that's a potential motivation for.
Well, I think the problem is that even if they wanted to do that, like they wanted this GOCK wanted to do that for some reason, I don't think they would ultimately. But
yeah,
the MP would say you have to be all given care to see or conditional ordination. I mean, the MP is just at a point where they sabotage most of everything they do anyway. So anyway. Someone posted an article by Aristides Papadakis about the Gregorian forms of rupture. That's an interesting article. Okay, what do you think about that, Father?
As I commented, you know, basically this is, I hate to say this, and I don't know how old this article is or how old.
I think it's from the book Christian East and the Rise of the Papacy, which is from.
I don't know when that book came out though. So, but in any case, it mentions the Dictatus Papa and it mentions the Hildebrandian reform. And it is basically, I mean, I hate to say this, but it's stuff we've been saying on YouTube now for months. You know, it's basically what some people are calling the Hildebrand thesis, but the simple reality is that it's not a thesis; it is what happened. And I think that in some senses, Papadakis, you know, he has some nice points. He does, you know, lay it out properly. But he misses things because he's not fully aware of that.
Okay, so what's an example? What are examples of things he gets right?
Things he got right. The Dictatus Papae being so revolutionary that it caused some sort of and it was huge in terms of what it was doing to the structure of the church. I think that he's kind of soft on it when he says, sadly, the fact that a threat to church unity and Christian tradition was not appreciated by the Gregorian reformers. I think exactly the opposite is true. I think that they knew exactly what they were doing and that they had every intention of creating the split that they did. I mean, you have to remember that it was right after Hildebrand's election that they sent Anselm of Lucca to go argue with the Greeks.
Well, we should also remember that when the Great Schism happened under Leo IX, Hildebrand and Humbert were in fact running Leo IX at the time.
Yeah.
So that was all Hildebrand and Humbert. That was all their plan to begin with. That was you know they ghost wrote.
That's something that Papadakis doesn't totally address either.
Hildebrand just didn't somehow come out of nowhere. He was actually there for like 30 or 25 years before.
There was really kind of a team Hildebrand. And the point is, he had been building it for a long time, including building a papal army.
I mean, people that opposed him were like Cadalus of Parma, who became the so-called anti-Pope Honorius. But they kind of they kind of hemmed him away and isolated him. I think at the time that Hildebrand was like the ghost, like kind of essentially he and Humbert were like, you might say the powers behind the throne during the 1050s. You had at least two counter-popes who were elected because people didn't like them. I mean, one was Honorius of Parma, or Cadalus of Parma, and the other was, I think, supposedly Benedict X, the anti-Pope Benedict X, or something like that. So what he gets wrong is he assumes
good motives on their part. They were sincere.
I don't think he takes into account that these things exist. I think he seems almost to think that Hildebrand happened in a vacuum. And so the Dictatus Papae seems to him to be kind of like he gets it right that it's a complete and total alteration of the structure of the church, but it seems to be like a blow from behind, and he doesn't realize that this is a part of a program that Hildebrand and his cronies have been putting together for a few years. So I think that's the main reason. Like, it's I tend to refer to the Great Schism as catastrophic, but it wasn't that catastrophic. Like, it wasn't like a hurricane happened. It wasn't like Hildebrand was elected and then time to create the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, there was a plan in place that you could see well documented, and you could see a resistance in place, which he may address. I don't know. It may be in the book. Maybe the book is worth buying on that. But definitely the fact that the Synod of Brixen and the election of Liebert of Ravenna as Clement III was left out. I don't know if that's in a later chapter, but when you put all those things together, you can see how the Roman Catholic Church was literally formed out of this affirmative claim of papal monarchical supremacy versus what was left of the West trying to stop it.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on it?
I've only just looked at it. I haven't had a chance to read everything.
Yeah, well, no, it definitely, it is one of the few things I've read, and it comes out of St. Vladimir Seminary Press, to my shock, as that far back as 94. But the point is that, the central theses that we explore in the question of who invented the Roman Catholic Church are all there.
He doesn't really provide a lot of, from looking through this article, which is an extract from his book, he kind of talks about things, and except for the Dictatus Papae, he doesn't, I've always kind of cautious of is a lot of these people don't seem to, it's just like the same thing with Meyendorff. They seem to talk a lot about stuff, but they don't quote large segments from the Church Fathers. They seem to just want to write overviews, and you have to trust them about everything. I mean,
they just.
Although a lot of what he says here, I think, is accurate from our own studies, independent of that. So
except for the stuff where he seems confused as to how it happened. It was far from a surprise.
The book was written in 1994.
Yeah, but what it is missing is it's missing more primary sources of the period, which would have shown the widespread resistance to what these reforms entailed. And those reforms, for lack of a better word, because I'd rather put reforms in quotes, were literally the creation of the Roman Catholic.
Okay.
So if there are any other questions, we can wait a minute, or we'll see. Was there another topic on the war zone you wanted to take a look at?
I'm looking right now. Let's see. There's the issue about the Council of Chalcedon and the discussion between the legates there and the trial judges. I think we've already talked about that. At least read the war zone. Nope, not much more to talk about, Father.
All right. Well, in that case, we did not get any telegrams from Ivan Borovkin offering us, 400 rubles to say something nice about Patriot or Kirill, so we can assume that we're not going to get KGB FSB funding, at least not this week. I was kind of hoping that would happen so that I could at least say that he has very good hair. But outside of that, not much else to say on the matter. I think, say a prayer for us, especially for Father Enoch. We're not doing too well with Father Enoch. He really needs to go to the doctor.
I've got to get my health first. Yes.
But in any case, and just remember some prayers, and we will be back, I guess, next week. And until then, everyone have a good night. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being there.
Again, I would encourage everyone to read the book Russia's Catacomb Saints.
It is in our links. It's up on the top.
So you can find it. It's for free PDF. It was, official, approved. Father Seraphim Rose edited it. Was worked on the translation. I mean, probably some of the best people wrote or ever produced in the late 70s, early 80s worked on that book. And to simply just flush it down the drain and to say that first off, if somebody is saying anti-Soviet propaganda, if that's supposed to be a trope that discredits, and I don't know how anybody can think the word anti-Soviet discredits somebody as being orthodox or having a correct opinion, but apparently that's the rising tide, I guess, some people. So you either got the weirdo, gay abortion axis of St. Vladimir's and the OCA and the Greek Archdiocese,
and
Democopolis, or you got the people who want to promote the Red Army as the Great Orthodox Army. So they're two sides of the same evil coin.
Pretty much. And that is Sergianism today, everyone.
All right. Oh, okay. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. Have a good night. Benedicite.
Benedicite.